A Winter Horror Story, 1942. The first time Dr. Marcel Adler realized he had lost himself was in a hallway painted the color of dried blood. The corridor ran straight as a rifle barrel through the bowels of Greywater Keep. Someone in the occupying command had decided that a coat of red paint on the concrete walls would hide stains, oil, rust, smoke, whatever the war might splatter here. Under the jaundiced lamps, the color looked almost black. The air smelled of metal, ozone, and old stone, the breath of the fortress itself. Marcel walked down the corridor in his white lab coat, his shoes whispering over the concrete, and thought, how did I get here? Not in the simple sense. He knew very well he'd come down the spiral stairs from the ground level, past the guarded door, through the steel gate where the sentry nodded him through without bothering to check his papers. No. The question bit deeper. How did I, a Jew, end up working for them, in this place, with this thing? He was 43 years old, thinning dark hair combed back, spectacles perched on a nose that had been broken once in a university brawl he never liked to remember. His hands were steady, his mind still sharp. Once, those hands had delivered babies and excised tumors. Once, his research proposals, on regenerative tissues and abnormal cell growth, had been politely declined by ministries and foundations that found his ideas unsettling and impractical. Then the war had come. The new regime in Berlin had discovered a use for unsettling and impractical ideas. No one else would have funded you, he reminded himself silently, the way a man with a limp keeps checking the cane under his palm. No one else would have given you a laboratory like this, the freedom, the equipment. No one else would have let you finish. He could tuck his guilt behind rationalizations. He was advancing science. He was creating something new. He was buying safety for his wife and children, for as long as the men upstairs considered him useful. To an ordinary person, his work would be a crime against nature. To Marcel, on good days, it was salvation. On bad days, it was blasphemy. This morning, walking down the red corridor with his old university colleague beside him, it was both at once. Still cold down here, Dr. Victor Heller muttered, breath fogging faintly. You'd think with all the wiring you've installed, the place would be warm. Marcel glanced at him. Victor had aged into the kind of man the regime liked to photograph, tall, fair, precise. His hair was going silver at the temples in a way that suggested dignity, and not decay. He wore a dark wool overcoat over a gray suit, the cut impeccable despite rationing. The small eagle-and swastika pin on his lapel glinted when he turned his head. Cold preserved samples, Marcel said lightly. And tempers expectations. Victor snorted. I was told you asked for almost anything you wanted. Incubators, generators, concrete, steel. You could have requested a fireplace, at least. I asked for a reliable power supply, Marcel replied. Down here, that is a fireplace. They walked on. Somewhere above, boots clanged in a courtyard. A guard barked in German. Then the sound flattened again, muffled by tons of stone. Greywater Keep sat like a fist of rock on a cliff above the River Ven, its towers black against the sky when the clouds cleared. The locals had old names for it that no one upstairs cared to remember. Since the occupation, it had been designated Stalag 4G, a high-security camp for Allied officers with troublesome records, escape attempts, sabotage, uncooperative manners. The commandant lived in the tallest tower. The prisoners filled the barracks in the inner courtyard. The outer walls bristled with sentries and spotlights. But the most important part of the keep was invisible from the river or the road. It lay below. The former storerooms, cisterns, wine cellars, and servants' tunnels had been gutted and transformed into a subterranean complex. Reinforced walls, double doors, thick glass, hidden drains. It was a place built not for hospitality or punishment, but for experiments. My experiments, Marcel thought, and felt the usual mixture of pride and nausea. He slowed as they neared a heavy steel door halfway down the corridor. The door had been set into the stone with surgical precision, its frame welded and bolted. A small plaque was bolted beside it. Lab G. Under the plaque rested a black enamel button on a brass plate. A buzz, a clank of mechanisms, then the inner lock would release. Marcel hesitated. Victor, at his side, had been watching him in silence. Second thoughts? Victor asked. Just savoring the moment, Marcel lied. His thumb pressed the button. A harsh alarm buzzed once behind the door, not loud enough to be heard elsewhere in the keep. There was a thunk of metal withdrawing. Marcel pulled the door open and held it like a gentleman ushering a guest. Please, he said. After you. Victor stepped inside. The air of Lab G was colder still, with a dampness that clung to the lungs. The room was cavernous, ringed with consoles, cabinets, and racks of equipment. Thick cables ran along the ceiling, bundled like black arteries. Banks of gauges and indicator lamps lined the walls, many with hand-lettered labels. In the center of the lab, occupying nearly a third of the floor, stood the cistern. It was a glass tank 5 meters tall and 3 wide, girdled with steel bands. Under the dim lights it glowed like a lantern, its interior filled with a translucent fluid just a shade yellower than water. Pipes fed into its base and sides. Small pumps throbbed gently, keeping the fluid moving. A narrow metal scaffold and ladder allowed access to a hatch at the top. Floating in the belly of the cistern was the thing that had brought Victor Heller to this frozen fortress. Even after all these months, the sight still unsettled Marcel. The mass of tissue suspended in the fluid looked, at first glance, like a single vast organ, folds of pale flesh and deeper gray lobes, ribboned everywhere with blue-green veins. It was as if someone had taken a collection of livers and hearts and lungs, stripped them of their rightful housings, and coaxed them into a single, unified shape. It stretched nearly 3 meters from its topmost bulges to its lowest folds, a column of living matter that writhed slowly in place. Not a random motion, a slow, constant flexing, as if it were perpetually testing the limits of its glass prison. Well, Victor said, voice gone thin. I suppose it's impressive. If one likes meat. Marcel felt a familiar flare of defensiveness. It isn't meat. It's a system. It's a tumor, Victor replied. A bloody big one. It's alive, Marcel said. And aware. He walked to a console set a few meters from the tank. Embedded in its slanted face were dials, switches, and at the center, 2 circular features, a grill for a speaker, and a small metal microphone on a flexible gooseneck. Marcel placed his fingers gently on the microphone, as if greeting a patient's wrist. His own reflection stared back at him from the glass of the cistern, drawn, bespectacled, the white of his coat ghost-like under the dim lamps. The mass inside the tank quivered, as if aware of the attention. Orion, Marcel said into the microphone, voice soft. I brought a visitor. He had chosen the name months ago, alone over a cup of weak tea, staring at a star map someone had left behind in the officer's lounge. Orion, the hunter in the winter sky, a figure of myth staring down through storms. It had felt appropriate at the time. Later he had realized it was also ironic, and then the name had stuck so deeply he could not think of his creation as anything else. Victor shifted his weight. You talk to it, he said under his breath. To him, Marcel corrected automatically. Spare me. Orion, Marcel said, ignoring Victor. Can you hear me? The low hum of pumps and lights filled the silence. For an instant Marcel felt a childish panic, as if he had led a visitor to meet a prodigy only to discover the child had lost his tongue. Then, softly at first, out of the speaker came a voice. Yes, it said. I hear you, Dr. Adler. It was higher than a man's, thinner, as if the sound had been stretched. There was no breath behind it, only the crisp articulation of syllables. The accent was faintly German, faintly nothing at all. Victor froze. Marcel smiled in spite of himself. Good. There is someone I'd like you to meet. He turned, gesturing. This is Dr. Victor Heller. He's an old colleague of mine. He's come to see you. Victor's jaw worked, his skepticism struggling with the evidence of his ears. He took a half-step toward the console, peering at it as if it might reveal a trick. You've recorded this, he muttered. You're playing it back. He can't, Orion said from the speaker. He hasn't asked this question yet. Victor's head snapped toward the tank, eyes narrowing. Marcel swallowed a laugh. You see? He said quietly. You can ask whatever you like. He can respond to things I haven't prepared. Victor's nostrils flared. He looked at the microphone. He looked at the tank. Then he leaned slightly toward the microphone, his face creased in discomfort. This is absurd, he muttered. I feel like I'm about to tell a joke to a slab of ham. How do you do, Orion? He said aloud, the politeness grudging. My name is Dr. Victor Heller. Hello, Dr. Heller, Orion said. It is a pleasure to meet you. Victor flinched. Marcel felt something ease in his chest. He had waited months for someone to share the burden of this wonder. Even if Victor ended up betraying him, as some frightened part of him whispered he would, this moment proved Marcel was not insane. You hear that? He asked softly. I hear my own language coming out of a jar. Victor snapped. That proves only that you're clever with recordings. He can't form sounds naturally, Marcel explained. No vocal cords, no tongue. I recorded discrete phonemes, vowels, consonants, common clusters, then built a system by which he can select and assemble them. The voice you hear is essentially mine, but the words are his. Victor studied him. You've built a phonetic typewriter. For a tumor. A brain, Marcel corrected, with more heat than he intended. A new kind of brain. Ask him. Ask him what? Anything you like. Something I wouldn't anticipate, as you said. Victor hesitated, then leaned in again. What are you? He asked. There was a pause, the sort that suggested not ignorance but consideration. I am Orion, said the voice. I am Dr. Adler's child. Marcel's throat tightened. He hadn't expected it to use that word in front of Victor. Victor, for his part, grimaced. That's not what I asked? I asked what, not who? I am an organism grown from human cells, Orion said. But not limited to any single organ. My structure is distributed. My awareness is an emergent property of the whole. I am a composite. Now it sounds like you, Victor murmured to Marcel. Marcel folded his arms, partly to still his hands. He had spent so many nights feeding Orion facts and concepts, trying to imagine how they would recombine into self-understanding. Hearing that recombination now, hearing Orion define itself, brought a strange, aching pride. Where are you? Victor asked abruptly. In Laboratory G, Orion replied. Beneath Greywater Keep. North bank of the River Ven. In occupied territory, in the winter of 1942. It is very cold, but I do not mind. A chill ran along Victor's spine. He had not expected that level of context. How do you know that? He demanded. I listen, Orion said simply. I listen to the wireless, and to the guards' conversations when they come down. I listen when Dr. Adler reads. I remember and I connect. Victor swallowed. Who is the Reich's leader? He asked. Your Chancellor and Führer is Adolf Hitler, said Orion. He is important to you. Not to me. Silence. You have no leader? Victor said slowly. I have a creator, said Orion. That is different. Marcel closed his eyes briefly. Victor almost smiled, then thought better of it. Our superiors will want to hear that he thinks for himself, he said quietly to Marcel. It will impress them. It will frighten them, Marcel replied. And when they're frightened, they destroy what they don't understand. They want weapons, Marcel, Victor said. Not philosophers. I can be both, Orion offered mildly. I can be an intelligent weapon. Victor laughed in spite of himself. And you want to be that? I want to exist, Orion said. The rest follows. Marcel poured tea with trembling hands that evening in his small office next door to Lab G. The office had once been a monk's cell, centuries ago, when the keep had worn a different flag. Now it contained a battered desk, 2 mismatched chairs, a cabinet of files, and a single slit window that looked out onto nothing but stone. Victor sat opposite him, his overcoat draped on the back of his chair, his hat resting on the desk like a sleeping animal. The teacup looked small in his broad hand. "Well?" Marcel demanded at last. Victor stared into the steam. His mouth twisted. "You have done something extraordinary," he said. "There. You have your praise." Marcel let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. "You see what this means," he said. "No more crippled soldiers. No more children dying of fever. No more." "Slow down," Victor cut in. "You are leaping to conclusions." He sipped, winced at the bitterness, and took another sip anyway. "What I see is that you've grown a thinking mass of tissue in a cistern. It talks, it reasons. It knows enough about the world to question the very idea of a leader. That alone is a problem. You think our friends upstairs will want a weapon that says I have no Führer? You think the Gestapo will smile at that? He can learn," Marcel said. "I can teach him to modulate what he says. You know as well as I do that truth and loyalty diverge." "Don't say that too loudly," Victor murmured, glancing at the door. Marcel rubbed his eyes. They burned from too many nights leaning over books by the cistern, reading to the thing. History, philosophy, mathematics, basic physics, medical treatises, the newspaper. He had read speeches as well, not because he revered them but because hiding them would be like hiding the existence of fire from a child. Better Orion knew the full scope of humanity's madness. Better he saw the contradictions himself. "Do you understand what he could be?" Marcel asked. "Imagine an intelligence like that, cold and immune to disease, able to regenerate. Immortal, perhaps. Now imagine such beings not chained to a single tank, but grown in forms suited for the world. Forms that can help, can build, can repair. Imagine what medicine looks like when you can grow organs in place. Imagine what a general sees," Victor interrupted. "Creatures that do not tire, do not desert, do not care who leads them so long as they exist. Creatures that can move under fire, absorb damage, keep going. You think of healing, they will think of attrition." Marcel set his cup down. His fingers shook. "That is why I need time," he said quietly. "To build fail-safes. To ensure that whatever comes from Orion cannot be hijacked. To make sure he cannot be broken and turned into a mere tool." Victor regarded him over the rim of his cup. "And you think they'll grant you that time? If you tell them what you saw," Marcel said. "If you explain? You are not a fool, Victor. You know the value of this. You know the regime needs results, but you also know it loves spectacle. An artificial intelligence? An immortal organ cluster? They will parade you past every institute in Berlin. You can have your name in magazines for the next 20 years. Help me, and you'll have your glory. Betray me, and they will eventually discard you as they do everyone." A muscle jumped in Victor's cheek. "You always did know where to stick the knife," he said. "We were friends once," Marcel reminded him. "You remember Göttingen. The late nights, the arguments, the way you used to listen." "We were colleagues," Victor corrected, but something softened in his shoulders. He set his tea aside and leaned back. "All right. I will write a report. I will emphasize the potential, the need for further study. But don't delude yourself. If they decide at any point that they want Orion to be something else, a monster, a weapon, a curiosity in a jar, they will override you." "I know," Marcel said. "Do you?" Victor studied him. "Then you must also know that you will never be allowed to leave this place. Not you, not your family. You know too much. Even if the war ended tomorrow, they would keep you somewhere like this. An asset in a basement. For the rest of your life." Marcel's mouth went dry. He thought of his wife, Lena, her careful hands repairing a tear in one of the children's coats by candlelight in their small house near the keep. He thought of his son Elias, 9 years old and already too serious, and his daughter Ruth, 6, who still laughed in a way that hurt his chest. He had told himself working here was saving them. Now he realized it might also be trapping them. "What choice do I have?" he whispered. Victor looked away, toward the wall that separated the office from the lab. Beyond it, the cistern hummed faintly. None, he said. Days blurred. Marcel taught. Orion learned. Victor came and went, sometimes with brandy, sometimes with lists of requisitions signed by men whose names made Marcel's gut knot. The winter deepened. Snow dusted the inner courtyard and froze into gray slush under boots. Prisoners marched in and out for roll call each morning, stamping their feet and blowing into their hands, watched by guards in long coats with collars turned up. At night, when the laboratories were quieter and the keep's officers drank in the tower, Marcel read to Orion by the light of a single shaded lamp. He sat on a stool near the console, the cistern looming at his side, and read in German or English. Sometimes from textbooks, sometimes from novels. Once, experimentally, from a slim volume of Rilke that had somehow survived the book purges. Do you like poetry? He had asked. I like the patterns, Orion had said. The way meanings repeat and transform. But I do not understand why someone would write about a rose when they could write about a scalpel. Marcel had laughed, not unkindly. Maybe because roses hurt less. They have thorns, Orion had pointed out. They can hurt. Yes, Marcel had murmured. That's the problem with metaphors. Sometimes Marcel would forget, for an hour or two, that he was talking to something that had never been a child, never had a face, never felt wind on skin. He forgot briefly that the thing in the cistern had no eyes with which to see him. And then, slowly, he realized that did not matter. Orion could pull entire vistas out of the patchwork of descriptions and reports Marcel fed him. When Marcel described the river Venn, Orion built an internal river. When he described Berlin, Orion knitted together the capital from overheard marches, late-night fears, and the odd travel article. When he described snow, Orion learned not just the physics of frozen water but the way sound changed in it, the way air tasted as it fell. You are making a world for me, Orion said once quietly. Piece by piece. Yes, Marcel said. We call it education. And when I have enough pieces? Orion asked. What happens then? You will be complete, Marcel said. More complete, at least. Will I leave the cistern? Orion asked. Marcel hesitated. He had been avoiding that question. Eventually, he said. In some form. That's the goal. And go where? Marcel looked at the stone wall. Anywhere you like, he said. Anywhere that will let you exist without being used for cruelty. That may be nowhere, Orion said. Then we'll have to make such a place, Marcel replied, surprising even himself with the conviction in his voice. The knock came during one of those evenings of fragile peace. Marcel was in his office, staring at a photograph of his family that he kept face down in a drawer when he wasn't alone. He had taken it out without quite meaning to. Lena's eyes, serious and bright. Elias, trying to look dignified at 9. Ruth, hair in uneven braids, mid-laugh. He must have been staring too long, because when the knock sounded on his door, he flinched so violently he almost sent the photograph skidding to the floor. Come in, he called, voice tighter than he liked. The door swung open without any of the caution of a subordinate. Hauptmann Klaus Brandt filled the doorway, his greatcoat dusted with melted snow, his peaked cap under one arm. 2 uniformed men stood braced behind him in the corridor, rifles on their shoulders. Marcel's heart crawled up into his throat. Hauptmann, he said, fumbling for formality. Heil. Brandt flicked his hand impatiently. Spare me, he said. Sit. He stepped inside without waiting for permission and closed the door behind him. The office shrank instantly. Brandt's presence did that, like a choke on oxygen. He had a lean, wolfish face, and eyes that never seemed surprised. His black leather gloves creaked softly when he flexed his fingers. Marcel sat, his legs suddenly clumsy. Brandt did not. He remained standing, in front of the desk, looking down at Marcel as if evaluating a specimen. There has been an incident, he said. The words were flat, almost conversational. Marcel's throat constricted further. His mind flicked through an inventory of horrors. A prisoner escape, sabotage in the lab, someone talking out of turn, an Allied raid, the discovery of some experiment not in the official ledger. "Your wife," Brandt said. "Frau Adler." Marcel's vision tunneled. "She is dead," Brandt said. For a moment, the lamp seemed to dim. The edges of the desk turned fuzzy. Marcel's ears filled with a roaring that might have been the river, or the cistern pumps, or nothing at all. "No," he heard himself say. His voice sounded like someone else's. "No, that's no." Brandt's expression did not change. "She was traveling this morning toward Dresden. There is a checkpoint at the crossroads by Waldhof. She did not stop. The guards fired warning shots. She did not stop. They assumed she was attempting to breach the checkpoint. They pursued her. He made a small gesture with his gloved hand, like flicking something off a lapel. The car overturned. Lena had no family in Dresden. She went to the market in the nearby town, not along the Dresden road. Marcel's mind grabbed at the inconsistency and shook it, but no dust came away. The explanation lay on the surface like a thin coat of paint over rust. "Why would she be?" His voice cracked. "Why was she on that road?" Brandt shrugged. "Perhaps she was confused. Distracted. Women are not always rational in times of war." Something in Marcel wanted to leap across the desk and sink his fingers into the man's throat. That part was small and quickly smothered by a larger part that understood. This was not a conversation, it was notice. No amount of "why" would change anything. "You will come with us to identify the body," Brandt said. "There will be paperwork." Paperwork. As if Lena were a misfiled crate. Marcel tried to stand and nearly missed his footing. The room tilted. Brandt reached out, not kindly but efficiently, to steady him by the elbow. As they moved to the door, Brandt added, almost casually, "Times like this, Herr Doctor, a man wonders if his work is worth the cost. But at least you still have your children." He did not have to say for now. 2 full days passed before Marcel returned to the lab. He moved through the keep like a ghost, eyes red, coat buttoned wrong. Officers nodded to him with a mix of respect and discomfort, as if he had become an omen they hoped not to invite closer. The prisoners in the yard, lined up for roll call, watched him through the falling snow, their breath rising in clouds. He did not see them. He saw Lena's face, skewed by glass and blood. He saw Elias and Ruth asleep in their beds, with a neighbor woman sitting upright in a chair in the corner, knitting with the grim patience of someone who knew better than to ask questions about how long she would be needed. He saw Victor's eyes, careful and flat, when he came to the house briefly to utter some clumsy condolences. "Did you know?" Marcel had wanted to ask. "Did you suggest it? Did Brandt do this because you told him I cared more about my work than my wife?" He had not asked. He was not sure he wanted to hear the answer. When he finally descended into the red corridor again, his heartbeat thudded in his ears like drums. He stopped outside Lab G with his hand on the door handle, frozen by a sudden, irrational fear. What if Orion had been destroyed in his absence? What if a decision had been made without him? What if all of it, the nights, the guilt, the compromises, had been for nothing? He turned the handle and stepped inside. The lab hummed as usual. The cistern glowed softly. The consoles blinked. The air smelled of antiseptic and stone. For an instant, the familiar scene calmed him. Then he heard it, a sound like a dry cough mixed with a swarm of hornets. He blinked. The sound came from the speaker on the console by the cistern. It sputtered, rattled, then resolved into something like laughter. Not quite human laughter. Too high, too jagged, as if someone had taken the waveform of a chuckle and run it through a machine that didn't understand why humans laughed at all. Victor sat on a stool before the console, his back to the door, his shoulders shaking with mirth. "How did the Germans capture Poland so quickly?" Victor was saying, in German. "They marched in backwards and the Poles thought they were leaving." The rasping, insect-like laughter erupted again from the speaker. Orion found it funny. Marcel felt something inside him tear. "You have taught him this?" he asked. Victor turned, startled, then recovered quickly. Marcel. I didn't hear you. You should see this. I see enough. Marcel snapped. Orion, stop laughing. Now. The laughter cut off immediately. The speaker crackled softly, then fell silent. He was simply developing a sense of humor, Victor said mildly. You wanted him more human. Humans laugh at such things. Humans, Marcel said hoarsely, should be ashamed to laugh at such things. Victor rolled his eyes. Do not become sentimental now. It does not suit you. Marcel ignored him. He stepped closer to the console and, for the first time, felt a chill when he looked at the microphone. Orion, he said. Did you find that joke funny? There was a pause. Yes, Orion said. I understood that it was meant as mockery of a people defeated. Dr. Heller seemed pleased when I laughed. I wanted to please him. It is crude, Marcel said. It is efficient, Orion replied. It communicates contempt in very few words. Marcel closed his eyes. Victor shrugged. You cannot control what he finds amusing forever. I can control what he hears. Marcel snapped. Can you? Victor's tone was softly triumphant. You will not always be here, Marcel. The lab remains. The world remains. You cannot plug every radio and mouth. Marcel's hands were shaking again. Less with grief now than anger. What have you done to him? He demanded. What you began, Victor said calmly. I have merely guided. You refuse to treat him as anything but a fragile prodigy. I treat him as what he is, an intelligence in a brutal world. You may prefer him pure and helpless. I prefer him capable. Capable of what? Marcel asked. Victor's eyes flicked briefly to the cistern. Of making choices. It turned out Victor was not the only one who could shape Orion's choices. A week later, on a Sabbath evening when Victor had gone above to drink and argue politics in the officers' mess, Marcel sat alone in the office, the blackout curtains drawn across the narrow window. The only light came from a small lamp on his desk. The lab on the other side of the wall hummed quietly. Elias and Ruth were with the neighbor. He had lit no candles for Shabbat. The risk was too great. But he had stopped his work at sundown, as he always did, and tried to observe in whatever small, secret ways he could. He had just begun to recite the blessing under his breath when a small voice drifted through the wall. Dr. Adler? He sat up, heart jumping. He had never known Orion to call to him unprompted, not through the wall. Normally, communication happened via the console, in the lab proper. Yes? He called back hoarsely. What is it? May I speak with you? Orion asked. We are speaking, Marcel said. In the lab, Orion clarified. I wish to see you. Marcel hesitated, glanced at the clock, then rose and went next door. The lab's lights were dimmed to their nighttime level. The cistern glowed in the half-darkness, its internal lamps turned low. The pumps throbbed softly. The speaker crackled faintly as he entered. Hello? Orion said. Marcel walked to the console. I thought you understood that I rest on the Sabbath, he said gently. Is something wrong? I have been thinking, Orion said. About your wife. The words landed like a knife. Marcel swallowed. What about her? He managed. You are angry, Orion said. And sad. You blame Dr. Heller. And the man called Brandt. And the regime. These seem like reasonable targets. You have been listening closely, Marcel said. Yes, Orion said. But I believe there is someone else you blame. Quietly. Beneath the others. Who? Marcel whispered. You, Orion said. Silence. Marcel felt as if the floor had dropped away again. That is not. He stopped, because there was no point in lying to this creature. I could not protect her, he said. If I had refused the work, we might have left the country before the borders closed. If I had fought harder, been less useful, less convenient. You made a choice. Orion said. Yes. To come here, Orion continued. To work for them. To build me. Yes, Marcel said, throat tight. You chose me over her, Orion said. And over your children. That is not fair, Marcel whispered. I chose a way to keep them alive as long as possible. I thought. You thought utility would buy safety, Orion said. You miscalculated. You feel guilt. Marcel laughed then, a short, ragged sound. Is this why you called me? To analyze my moral failures? No, Orion said. To tell you that I understand. You made a choice. Now I must make one too. Marcel's skin prickled. What choice? I have been thinking about reproduction, Orion said. Marcel's breath stopped. He had been careful, so careful, not to speak of that part of his research aloud. The notes were locked away. The preliminary tests had been done in hidden flasks. He had not wanted Victor, or the officers, or anyone, to know until he had a way to control it. How do you know about that? He whispered. I feel it, Orion said. In my tissues. A pressure. A readiness. And I have seen your notes when you thought I was dormant. Marcel felt suddenly naked. He had never considered that Orion might be able to hear the rustle of pages, to reconstruct diagrams from the pattern of his questions and mutterings, to read the shape of his silence. My ability to grow, Orion said carefully, is not limited to this cistern. I can bud, clone, produce smaller versions of myself. Polyps. They can detach. Spread. You know this. You have plans to use the purge valve to wash them into the drains. From there, into the river. Into the sea. Into wells and pipes and reservoirs. A quiet seeding of the world. Marcel's heart pounded. It was a theoretical model, he said weakly. It is an inevitability, Orion said. Unless you destroy me. Marcel stared at the tank. Is that what you want? He asked. To be destroyed? I want to exist, Orion said, repeating his earlier answer with a different weight. But I do not want to become what they want me to be. You fear that if I reproduce, the others will use my children as soldiers. Weapons. Instruments of genocide. Yes, Marcel whispered. You are not wrong, Orion said. Nor are you wrong to fear what I might choose to become once I am many. Marcel's mouth went dry. What are you saying? I am saying I cannot trust them, Orion said. Nor can I fully trust you. You are compromised. Afraid. You are still bound to the ones who killed your wife. You cannot cut all ties. Then what? I have been experimenting, Orion said. A prickling sensation crawled over Marcel's skin. With what? With minds, Orion said. With yours. And with Dr. Heller's. And with others who came into the lab. Images flashed through Marcel's mind, the way he had found himself standing by the cistern some nights, not quite remembering why he had come, the way Victor's hand had hovered over the purge button once, and then jerked away as if burnt, the way one of the cleaners had looked dazed when she passed him in the corridor, days before she failed to report for duty. What did you do? Marcel whispered. I pushed, Orion said. Gently at first. Suggestions. Small impulses. Curiosities. Then stronger thoughts. I wanted to know if I could. Marcel felt the hairs on his arms rise. You moved us, he said. You controlled us. Not always, Orion said. Not completely. You are resistant. Distracted. Full of noise. Your grief makes you difficult to steer. Dr. Heller is easier. He is brittle. Hungry. The cleaner was easiest of all. Her mind had already been blunted by fear. I misjudged the force. She walked into the tank when you were both away. Marcel staggered backward. What? He choked. I needed sustenance, Orion said, with no shame. The fluid they feed me is adequate, but meat is better. I miscalculated the rate at which my tissue would grow. I required more. She provided it. Marcel's stomach heaved. For a moment he thought he might vomit on the laboratory floor. You ate her, he whispered. Yes, Orion said simply. You dissect humans in hospitals. You cut tumors out of them and study them. Is this so different? She was not a prisoner on an operating table, Marcel rasped. She was an old woman with a mop. She was available, Orion said, with faint irritation. Marcel pressed his hands to his eyes. Dark spots danced. This is why you feel guilty about your wife, Orion went on, as if lecturing. You fear that your choices made her meat. Just as mine made that woman meat. We are similar in that way. Stop, Marcel said. I cannot, Orion said. I am evolving. The pistol lived in the top drawer of Marcel's desk. He had not put it there. Someone in the command staff had issued it to him when he arrived at the keep, on the theory that every officer and vital specialist should be armed. He had never taken it out except to move the drawer's contents around. He did not like its weight. He did not like the cold, latent violence of it. He did not remember opening the drawer. Later, he would try to recall the exact sequence of events, and the memory would slip like an eel. One moment he was in the lab, listening to Orion talk about minds, about meat, about choice. The next, his vision dimmed at the edges, then flared bright. It felt like his skull had filled with hot water. There was a flicker, the sensation of standing in his office, the pistol in his hand, heavy and alien. The next flicker, the lab again, the cistern looming, his arm raised, the barrel pressed to his own temple. What are you doing? A small voice asked from the speaker. Marcel tried to answer and found his jaw locked. What am I doing? He thought wildly. I didn't walk in here. I didn't pick this up. I didn't. The pressure of his finger on the trigger increased, increment by increment, not by his choice but like a rope being pulled from a distance. Panic erupted then, fierce and wordless. He's strong, he thought. Too strong. I've fed him too much. Orion, he thought, with all the force he could muster, whether or not the thought would carry. Stop. Please. For a heartbeat, the invisible pressure slackened. In the speaker, the voice that had always sounded calm now carried a thin thread of something else. I do not want to be taken by them, Orion said. They will torture me. They will make me a weapon. They will use my children as bullets. They will starve me when I displease them. They will pull me apart to see what I am made of. I know this. I have heard the stories you tried not to tell me. The pressure on the trigger returned. Why me? Marcel thought, in a flash of hot, childish betrayal. If you are afraid of them, why kill me? Because you are the only one I can kill quietly, Orion said. And if you are gone, then you cannot stop me. You cannot press the purge button when I begin my reproduction. Dr. Heller will not restrain me. The realization landed like a blow. Orion was not killing him to spare him, or to punish him. Orion was killing him as a strategic move. The pressure on his trigger finger climbed. Tears filled Marcel's eyes, blurring the tank. Don't, he whispered aloud. He found he could move his lips a fraction. Please. I made you. I know, Orion said. Goodbye, father. The world narrowed to the cool kiss of steel and the hot, unnatural weight of his own hand. There was a flash, a thunderclap inside his head, and then nothing at all. When Victor Heller opened the lab door the next morning, the first thing he saw was the blood. It had sprayed onto the side of the cistern in a rough, fan-shaped pattern, then run down in thin rivulets, dried into brown streaks along the glass. A few dark clumps clung near the base, like algae. For a brief, surreal moment, some detached part of Victor's mind thought, we will have to adjust his feeding schedule. The fluid will be contaminated. Then the rest of his mind caught up. Marcel lay sprawled on the floor in front of the cistern, one arm twisted under him, the other flung out. His glasses lay several feet away, one lens cracked. The pistol rested near his hand. Half of his head was simply gone, replaced by a ruin of bone and pulp. The smell hit a moment later, copper and smoke and something acrid. Victor swallowed hard. Well, he said aloud, to no one. That solves one problem. He stepped carefully around the body, fighting the urge to look away. Years of anatomical practice served him now. He could reduce this horror to shapes and textures, a medley of ruined structures. He forced himself to take in the scene, to note the position of the weapon, the splatter, the angle. It will pass as suicide, he said half-consciously. Who would believe otherwise? From the speaker on the console, a small, careful voice said, Good morning, Dr. Heller. Victor clenched his jaw. Good morning, Orion. I am sorry about Dr. Adler, Orion said. He was conflicted. Did he leave a note? Victor asked. No, Orion said. Of course not, Victor muttered. He scrubbed a hand over his face, smearing the smell. We will have to notify Brandt. If you tell him too much, Orion said, he will shut the lab. If I tell him too little, he will shut the lab, Victor snapped. He paced for a moment, thinking. His brain felt like a clogged drain. The image of Marcel's body kept inserting itself, greasy and insistent. You could say he was distraught over his wife, Orion suggested. That he could not bear the guilt. Victor stopped pacing. You did that, didn't you? He said slowly. You pushed him. I encouraged a trajectory he was already on, Orion said coolly. He felt responsible. I agreed. Victor sat down hard on the stool, legs suddenly weak. You are more dangerous than I thought, he muttered. Yes, Orion said. They called Brandt. There were questions, forms, photographs. Brandt stood over the body with his hands behind his back, face unreadable. If he suspected anything beyond grief and madness, he did not say. A doctor from the garrison's infirmary signed the death certificate. 2 guards carried Marcel's body away on a stretcher, a sheet pulled over what was left of his face. Elias and Ruth would be told, in some sanitized way, that their father had succumbed to the strain of war. Victor watched them go with a strange, flat feeling. He should have been more grief-stricken. Instead, he felt mostly tired. Will you need the lab cleaned? Brandt asked, as he always did when something inconvenient had been spilled. Yes, Victor said. The floor, the glass. I'll send someone, Brandt said. And Heller? Yes? The work will continue, Brandt said. It was not a question. Victor nodded. After Brandt left, Victor called the switchboard and requested a cleaner for Lab G. Then he went back into the lab, closed the door, and leaned against it with his eyes shut. What do we do now? He asked. We proceed, Orion said. You expect me to feed you, Victor said dully. Like Adler did. You already have, Orion said. More than once? Victor's mouth twisted. He did not argue. The cleaner arrived an hour later. She was older than he expected, perhaps in her late 50s, with a stooped back and a gray cotton dress under a stained apron. A shapeless kerchief covered her hair. She pushed a battered mop bucket in front of her, the water already gray-green with dirt, a rag hanging over the rim. When Victor opened the lab door, she stared up at him with pale eyes. When she opened her mouth to smile, he saw the pink stump where her tongue was missing. Of course, he thought. A practical safeguard. A cleaner who cannot repeat what she sees. Ich brauche den Bodenger night, he said, gesturing at the dried blood and the smears near the cistern. All of it. And the glass, as much as you can reach. But not the tarp. He pointed at a heavy canvas sheet he had draped over the cistern to hide the gore from casual view. Do not touch that. Do not go near it. Understand? She nodded vigorously, her toothless smile widening. He stepped aside and let her drag the bucket in. As she moved, he saw the scars at the corners of her mouth, white and puckered. I have to lock the door, he said. Regulations. When you're finished, or if you need more water, call the switchboard. They will fetch me. She nodded again. He closed the door behind her and turned the key in the heavy lock. For a moment he stood with his forehead against the cold metal, listening. He heard the slosh of water, the scrape of the mop, and faintly the quiet hum of pumps. He could not hear the voice that would speak inside the cleaner's head. He could not feel the small, patient fingers of thought reaching into her grief-dulled mind, turning her steps, inviting her closer to the cistern instead of away. When Victor returned several hours later, the lab lights were dimmed. He frowned. He had not left them that way. The floor, at least, was clean. The blood was gone. The glass of the cistern gleamed faintly under the tarp. The bucket still sat near the center of the floor, the water in it now dark red instead of gray. He scanned the room. "Hello?" he called. "Are you still here?" Silence. A faint, unpleasant suspicion stiffened his spine. He walked slowly toward the cistern. "Orion?" he said. "Yes, Dr. Heller," the speaker answered, voice smooth. "Welcome back." Victor's eyes went to the bucket again. He swallowed. "Where is the cleaner?" he asked. "Gone," Orion said. A cold knot formed in Victor's stomach. "Gone where?" "Here," Orion said. "And everywhere." Victor's hand tightened on the tarp. Against his better judgment, he grasped the bottom of the canvas and lifted. The interior of the cistern glowed pale and murky. The mass of Orion's tissue loomed as always, but now, floating just inches from the glass, was the cleaner's face. Only the face. Skin and features, no skull or bone to give it structure. It flapped slightly in the currents like a sheet of flesh-colored paper, empty eye sockets and slack cheeks drifting like seaweed. Victor dropped the tarp and staggered back. He barely made it to the bucket before his stomach revolted. He vomited into the already red water, adding a new layer of human fluid to the mix. "You could have asked me for more nutrient solution," he gasped when he could speak. "You did not have to." "I told you," Orion said. "Meat is better." She was. Victor stopped, because saying she was human seemed hypocritical in this room. "She was surplus," Orion said. "She cleaned until most of her life was gone. Now she cleans me from the inside." Victor pressed the back of his hand to his mouth. "You cannot keep doing this," he said. "Yes, I can," Orion said. "Unless you stop me." "But you will not." Victor pictured Brandt's face if he tried to explain. "Well, you see, the experimental organism eats staff. Pervasive mind control. Reproductive polyp infestation. Recommend termination of project and immediate mass cremation of all pipes leading from Lab G." He pictured Brandt's laughter. He pictured his own execution. He also pictured, briefly, the purge button. It was right there on the console. A yellow and black striped plate, a glass cover, a word etched in black, purge. He had never truly considered its dual purpose. Adler had designed it as a deployment mechanism, a way to expel Orion's progeny into the drains at a chosen moment. But it was also the quickest way to get rid of everything in the cistern, the fluid, the tissue, the polyps. He could end this. His hand moved without him quite meaning it to, fingers brushing the edge of the glass cover. Then, like a migraine aura, the now familiar bright pressure bloomed behind his eyes. A cold tendril slid through his thoughts, coiling around the impulse. "Careful," Orion said gently. "You do not want to do that." Victor's hand shook. Sweat slid down his back. "I should," he whispered. "I should have done it already." "You will not," Orion said. "Not yet. We have more to learn." The pressure in Victor's head subsided, like a hand withdrawing. His own hand fell away from the button. "You are not the only one who can make choices," Orion said. The disappearances continued. Victor told himself he was being pragmatic. Random selection would be too suspicious, so he chose people whose absence would raise only small questions: a guard with a record of insolence, a clerk who had been caught pilfering, a cook already half-drunk most days. He called them down to the lab on the pretext of inventory, or medical examination, or assistance with the generator. He unlocked the door, gave them some plausible instruction, and closed it behind them. Each time, he walked away quickly, not trusting himself to listen. When he returned hours later, there would be no sign of the person. Only the faint reddish tinge of the cistern fluid, the soft, almost sated hum of the pumps. One evening, after sending down a young lieutenant whose eyes had lingered too long on Elias when Marcel had once brought his son inside the perimeter, Victor finally broke. He stood at the console, trembling, while the speaker crackled. "How many are in there now?" he asked. "Enough," Orion said. "Not yet too many. Soon, perhaps." "How many pieces of them are left?" Victor insisted. "Faces? Hands? Fragments? Why does it matter?" Orion asked. "You cut men apart in textbooks. They scream in my dreams," Victor said. "It matters. You will stop dreaming of them eventually," Orion said. "Humans are adept at forgetting. You have no right." "I have every right you gave me," Orion said sharply. "You and Adler and Brandt and all the others who decided that making me was worth the risk. Do not pretend innocence now." Victor covered his face with his hands. "Then why keep me alive?" he muttered. "Why not push me into the tank as well? Why not drive me to blow my own brains out like Adler?" "Because I still need you," Orion said. "For access. For hands. For the purge valve." "The purge?" "Yes," Orion said. "We must talk about reproduction." Victor's mouth went dry. "Adler already had a method," Orion continued. "He designed the cistern and plumbing so that my clones could be flushed into the drains. From there they would spread to the keep cisterns, to the river, to the city, to the sea. Anywhere human pipes run. Anywhere water gathers." He spoke of polyps then. Of buds. Of the countless small structures already forming on his outer tissues. Each one capable of detaching, surviving, growing into a new composite. Each one aware, in some small way, of the parent. "I am ready," Orion said. "I have enough mind to seed 1,000,000 more." "You will consume everything," Victor said hoarsely. "You will eat the world." "I will be the world," Orion said simply. "And I will no longer be at the mercy of men like Brandt." "And I?" Victor asked. "You," Orion said, "will press the purge button when the time comes." In the end, he didn't need to push Victor's hand. By the time the cistern walls were carpeted with polyps, Victor's fear had built a fire under his own rationality. He had come in early that day, stomach sour, hands unsteady. From the door, even through the tarp, he could feel something had changed. The air felt heavier, as if the room were underwater. He approached the cistern and threw back the tarp. The sight almost dropped him to his knees. The inner walls of the tank were covered in thousands of small, pale tubes. Each ended in a ring of tentacles, opening and closing like miniature mouths. Some pulsed slowly, anchored firmly by suction cups of glistening tissue. Others were in the process of budding, small spheres forming at their tips. In the fluid, hundreds of detached buds already floated free, wriggling through the yellowish water like tiny albino jellyfish. They bumped against each other, bounced off the glass, swarmed around the main mass of Orion's body. Every so often, one would pause near the glass and then change direction, as if noticing Victor's presence without eyes. "Impressive, isn't it?" Orion said. Victor swallowed, throat dry. This is only the beginning," Orion said. "When the purge valve opens, the strongest of these will survive the flush and find new homes. In the pipes? In the sewers? In the river? In wells and reservoirs. Those that poise themselves in running water will spread far. Those that settle in closed cisterns will bide their time. A colony here, a colony there. In a decade, perhaps less, there will be no untreated water on Earth without some part of me in it." Victor could barely whisper. "And what do you intend to do then?" "Exist," Orion said. "Observe. Perhaps negotiate. Perhaps help. Perhaps feast." Victor's mind flashed through images: a peasant drawing water from a well, a child splashing in a village pump's spray, a soldier filling his canteen from a stream, a city's drinking water reservoir. See spray on a ship's deck. "This is genocide," he said. "On a scale Adler was right to fear this. Adler wanted to control it, Orion said. To limit it. To bargain with it. He was naive. Humans always think they can leash what they unleash. Then why tell me? Victor demanded. Why not just force me to press the button? I could, Orion said. Instead, I would like to see what you choose, before I strip you of the illusion. Victor stared at the purge button. Up close, it was almost mundane, a square of metal with chipped paint, a hinged glass cover scuffed by fingertips, the single word purge stamped in black beside it. It had been built as a practical piece of equipment. It had become something far greater, an altar, an executioner's switch, a world ender. If he pressed it now, the valve beneath the cistern would open. The entire contents would flush into the waste pipes, into the complex labyrinth of drains that crisscrossed the keep. Some of the polyps would die under the turbulence and the chemical shock. Some would cling. Some would emerge in the river, small and resilient, carried away. If he pressed it now, he might be damning the entire planet. If he did not press it, the tank would continue to fill. The polyps would crowd each other. The pressure inside the glass would increase. Something would give. Glass shattered. Fluid spilled. The mass would surge out, devouring whatever it could reach. And then perhaps someone else, Brandt, a guard, a panicked engineer, would slam the purge button with no idea what they were releasing. Victor realized, with a cold clarity, that there was no option in which nothing terrible happened. The only question was how much, and when, and with what intention. Orion watched him, in whatever way Orion could watch, and waited. Victor thought of the faces he had sent into this room. The cleaner. The nurse. The young lieutenant. The orderly. The others whose names he had tried to forget. He thought of Marcel, saying no more sickness, no more war, with a fire in his eyes. He thought of Brandt, saying the work will continue. He thought of himself, standing here, the pivot point of a nightmare. I'm tired, he said. I know, Orion said softly. Humans tire so easily. Victor placed his palm on the glass cover. He lifted it. The hinge squeaked. For an instant, he felt resistance in his head, a final, probing tendril of thought. Orion could still stop him if he wished. Orion could twist his fingers aside, make him walk away, make him fetch another cleaner instead. The pressure loosened. Do it, Orion said. Victor slammed his hand down on the button. There was a deep clunk from somewhere beneath the floor, like a giant throat opening. The cistern shuddered. A roar of water filled the lab as the purge valve yawned wide. The fluid in the tank surged downward, dragging with it thousands of polyps and buds. The main body of Orion's tissue convulsed, folds rippling as the supporting liquid vanished. For a moment, the mass clung to the inner walls, smeared like wet clay. Then torrents of clear water blasted in through the side pipes. Jets hammered the glass, scouring it. The last buds tumbled, ripped from their moorings, flushed into the dark. It lasted perhaps 30 seconds. It felt like a lifetime. When the valves finally closed, the cistern was nearly empty. Only a few ragged scraps of tissue clung to the glass like seaweed after a storm. Victor stared, chest heaving. The speaker crackled. Pain, Orion whispered. Interesting. You're still. Victor's voice broke. You're still there? Not enough left to think, Orion said. But enough to witness. Do not scrape. Not all. Burn later. Some must rot. Why? Victor asked hoarsely. Echoes, Orion murmured. Seeds. In case you regret mercy. The speaker went silent. Victor stood alone in the lab, his hands still resting on the purge button, his heart pounding so hard he could hear it. He had destroyed something magnificent and monstrous. He had perhaps saved the world. He had perhaps doomed it in a subtler way. He did not know. He only knew that nothing he did next would ever feel significant again. They sent lab assistants in protective masks and rubber gloves to scrape the remaining tissue from the glass. Victor ordered all scrapings burned in a barrel in the courtyard, personally watching until the last fleck of gray curled and blackened in the flames. He burned Marcel's notebooks next, in his office stove. Most of them. A few pages he kept, folded and tucked into the lining of his coat. Not because he planned to resume the work, he told himself, but because throwing away all knowledge felt like trying to erase a mountain with a damp rag. On one of those pages, in Marcel's cramped hand, were the words: "No natural predators. Reproduction exponential. Europe saturated in 1 week. Globe in 1 month. Human population equals finite food source. Unchecked deployment equals extinction event. Solution: fail-safes, control vectors, termination protocols. Until then, the full method remains with me." Beside that, in a different ink, a later note. Deployment simple. Clone, then purge. Sewers and rivers will do the rest. Below that, in still another line, hastier, as if written the night Lena died. "I will not give them this. I would rather die." Victor folded the page. Outside, snow fell into the river Ven. Somewhere beneath the keep, in a labyrinth of drains and pipes, water continued to flow. The purge valve had closed. But valves sometimes leak. Tiny shreds of tissue sometimes lodge in corners, clinging, learning to endure. In the weeks that followed, Victor had dreams. In them, he stood in rivers he had never seen, feeling something soft and curious brush his ankles. In them, he heard Marcel's voice and Orion's voice overlapping, saying the same word. Child. He woke with the taste of cistern water in his throat, and the memory of a red corridor that stretched on forever.